Yuki Tanaka sat in the center of the great translation chamber, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy. The room hummed with the quiet energy of universal translators working overtime. Representatives from 847 different species had gathered for one purpose. They all wanted to understand a single human word that refused to make sense in any of their languages. The word was night. Yuki looked around at the confused faces staring back at her. The Vorthans with their blue scales shifted nervously. The tall Zenthians clicked their beaks in frustration. Even the ancient ethereals, who claimed to understand all concepts in the universe, floated in their containment fields, looking puzzled. "Explain again," said High Translator Vexthan, his tentacles writhing with impatience. "This word appears in your military documents. We need to understand it for the galactic database. But every translation we attempt fails." Yuki took a deep breath. She had been trying to explain this for 3 days. "A knight is not just a warrior," she said slowly. "We have words for warrior. We have words for soldier. Knight means something different." The Calarian representative, a being that looked like walking crystal, made a sound like breaking glass. "Different how? A fighter is a fighter. They use weapons to defeat enemies. What else is there?" "Knights followed a code," Yuki said. "They swore oaths. They promised to protect people weaker than themselves. They promised to fight for what was right, even if it meant dying. Dying for others makes no evolutionary sense," clicked translator Zixha. Her insect-like head tilted in confusion. "Fighting for resources. Yes. Fighting for territory. Yes. Fighting for mates. Yes. But dying for strangers? This is genetic suicide." Yuki stood up and walked to the center of the room. The holographic display showed the problematic human documents floating in the air. Ancient texts, mixed with modern military manuals. All of them used the word night in ways that broke every translation algorithm in the galaxy. "Look at this passage," she said, pointing to a glowing section. "From Earth's medieval period. It says a knight must protect the innocent, defend the weak, speak truth, and show mercy to enemies." "Costs him what?" asked a draconian diplomat, smoke curling from his nostrils. "His life, his wealth, his comfort, everything he values personally." The room erupted in confused chatter. Translators pulled up their species' military codes on portable screens. None of them contained anything like what Yuki described. "Military codes exist for victory," stated Commander Thexnall of the Hegemony Forces. "Soldiers fight to win. They retreat when losing. They preserve their strength for better battles. What you describe sounds like madness." "That's the problem," Yuki said quietly. "You see it as madness. Humans see it as the highest honor." High Translator Vex then extended a tentacle toward the human documents. "Perhaps you could give us examples. Show us how this knight concept worked in practice?" Yuki nodded and called up a new hologram. "Sir William Marshall served 5 English kings. Could have been rich and safe, but spent his life fighting to protect his kingdom. Died poor because he gave everything to help others. Genetic failure," muttered the Calarian. "Roland at Ronzevo. Could have retreated and saved his life. Instead, he fought impossible odds to give civilians time to escape. Died with his men, but saved thousands." "Tactical error," said Commander Thexnall. "Joan of Arc. A peasant girl who convinced kings to let her lead armies. Fought not for money or power, but because she believed it was right. Burned at the stake for her beliefs. Mental illness." Diagnosed Dr. Yilthara from the Medical Council. Yuki felt a familiar frustration building. How could she explain something that every human child understood? She tried a different approach. "What if I told you that knights weren't just individuals? They were part of a system, a way of thinking that made Earth's societies stronger? How can self-sacrifice make societies stronger?" asked the ethereal representative, its voice echoing from its containment field. Logic dictates that preserving the best fighters increases survival chances. Before Yuki could answer, an alarm began blaring throughout the translation chamber. Red lights flashed, and emergency broadcasts filled the air in dozens of languages. High Translator Vexthan's tentacles went rigid. "Impossible," he whispered. The main screen shifted to show deep space sensor readings. Dark shapes moved between the stars. Ships, but not like any current technology. Ancient, massive, wrong. "The Devourers have returned," announced the automated emergency system. "All species prepare for immediate evacuation of outer colony worlds. This is not a drill. The Devourers have returned." Chaos erupted in the chamber. Representatives shouted into communication devices in their native languages. Some species immediately began planning retreats to their home systems. Others debated which colonies were worth defending and which should be abandoned. Through it all, Yuki stood quietly watching the sensor data. She recognized the ships from old human archives. Her people had faced these machines before. Long ago. The stories had become legends, but the records remained. "You want to know what night means?" she said, but her voice was lost in the panic. High Translator Vexthan was coordinating evacuation plans when he noticed Yuki's calm expression. "Human, why are you not panicking? Do you not understand? The Devourers destroyed the last galactic civilization. They consume entire worlds. Even united, our species barely survived their first attack." Yuki looked up at him with steady eyes. "We know about the Devourers. Our ancestors fought them once before." "Impossible. Humans were primitive when the Devourers first came." "Yes," Yuki said quietly. "We had no advanced weapons, no spaceships, no energy shields. All we had were nights." The chamber fell silent, except for the continuing alarms. Every translator stared at the small human woman. "And?" prompted Vexthan. "We won." Commander Thexnall laughed harshly. "Primitive humans defeated machines that conquered the galaxy? With medieval weapons? Impossible." Yuki walked to her communication console and opened a channel to human space. "Admiral Chen, this is Translator Tanaka. The Devourers have returned. Requesting immediate military consultation with Galactic Command." A human voice crackled through the speaker. "Understood, Tanaka. Tell them we're activating night protocols. They'll want to know what that means." Yuki looked around the room at hundreds of confused alien faces. "That's exactly what they want to know, Admiral. They can't translate the word night. It doesn't exist in their languages." "Of course it doesn't," came Admiral Chen's voice. "Tell them, if they want to survive what's coming, they'll need to learn what it means to be a knight. We'll be there in 6 hours." The communication ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Outside, the first reports were coming in. Outer colonies going dark. Devourer machines awakening after centuries of sleep. And somewhere in human space, ancient protocols were being activated. Protocols based on a word that had no translation in any galactic language. A word that might be the key to survival itself. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the human flagship Excalibur, watching as alien vessels approached the new Camelot system. The delegation from the Galactic Defense Council looked impressive with their sleek ships and advanced weapons. But Chen had seen their tactical reports. When the Devourers attacked, these same ships would be the first to retreat. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Sato from communications. "The alien delegates request permission to observe our training exercises. They want to understand our night protocols before committing their forces." Chen nodded. "Grant permission. Send them to Training Ground 7. Commander Watanabe is running scenarios there." 3 hours later, the alien delegation stood on an observation platform watching human soldiers in a simulation. The exercise area looked like a destroyed city with holographic civilians trapped in collapsed buildings. Enemy forces advanced from 3 directions. High Translator Vex then extended his tentacles toward the scene below. The tactical situation is clear. Your forces should establish a perimeter here. He pointed to high ground behind the civilians. Let the enemy advance, then strike from superior position. Admiral Chen shook her head. Watch what they actually do. Below them, the human commander Jin Watanabe studied his tactical display. The smart move was obvious. Pull back to the hills, let the enemy take the civilian area, then counterattack from strength. But instead, Watanabe ordered his forces forward into the trapped civilians. Madness, muttered Commander Thexnall. He's dividing his forces in the face of superior numbers. Basic military doctrine says to maintain unit cohesion. Squad Alpha, extract civilians from Grid 7. Watanabe's voice carried over the speakers. Squad Beta, hold the eastern approach. I don't care if we're outnumbered 3-1. No one gets left behind. The Calarian delegate made her glass-breaking sound. This is inefficient. Those holographic civilians are not real. Why risk forces for simulations? Chen watched the alien faces as her soldiers moved into impossible positions. Because, when the real battle comes, they need to know they can do it. Knights don't calculate odds when innocents need protection. On the training ground, the simulation grew more desperate. Enemy forces closed from all sides. Any normal military unit would call for extraction. Instead, the humans dug in around the civilians, forming protective circles that left their own backs exposed. Squad Leader Martinez to command, came a voice over the radio. Taking heavy fire. Request permission to withdraw to safety. All eyes turned to Commander Watanabe. The logical answer was obvious. Save your forces. Fight another day. But Watanabe's response made the aliens shift uncomfortably. Negative, Martinez. Those civilians are counting on us. Hold position. Sir, we could lose the entire squad. Then we lose the entire squad. But we don't abandon innocents. Night protocols are in effect. Dr. Yilthara from the Medical Council activated her scanner. Admiral Chen, your soldiers show elevated stress hormones. Fear responses are normal. Yet they continue to obey orders that guarantee injury or death. How do you override their survival instincts? End quote. Chen smiled grimly. We don't override anything, Doctor. Knights feel fear just like everyone else. The difference is what they choose to serve. Below them, the simulation reached its climax. Human forces were surrounded and taking heavy casualties. But every civilian had been evacuated. As the last transport lifted off, the remaining soldiers formed a final defensive line. Beautiful, whispered one of the trapped civilians. A holographic projection that looked remarkably real. They saved us all. The simulation ended with most of the human force eliminated. In any normal military assessment, the exercise would be marked as a complete failure. Good work, he told them. Mission accomplished. But, Commander, called one soldier, we lost 70% of our forces. And we saved 100% of the civilians, Watanabe replied. Knights measure victory differently than soldiers. The alien delegates exchanged confused glances. High Translator Vex then approached Admiral Chen. Your forces fight with emotional responses, rather than logical tactics. How can this be effective against machine intelligences? Because machines think logically, Chen said. They calculate odds. They predict rational behavior. They expect enemies who value their own survival above everything else. She gestured toward the training ground where human soldiers were already setting up the next scenario. What happens when they face enemies who don't follow those rules? Who will die for strangers? Who choose honor over logic? Commander Thexnall pulled up tactical displays on his portable unit. According to our archives, the Devourers defeated every galactic coalition using superior strategic analysis. They predicted each species' retreat points, calculated acceptable loss ratios, exploited our logical survival responses. Exactly, Chen said. But our ancestors didn't have acceptable loss ratios when innocents were threatened. She led the delegation to a museum section of the ship. Ancient weapons hung on the walls, swords and armor that looked impossibly primitive compared to galactic technology. These belonged to Sir Gareth the Bold, Chen explained, stopping before a simple steel sword. Killed, defending a village of strangers from raiders. Never met the villagers before. Gained nothing from protecting them. Did it anyway, because his knight's oath demanded it. Genetic dead end, stated the Calarian flatly. But his example inspired others. Chen continued. Knights who fought not for gain, but for principle. When the first Devourer scout ships arrived at Earth in our medieval period, they encountered something they couldn't process. She moved to the next display, showing ancient manuscripts. Human warriors who attacked impossible odds without hesitation, who protected evacuating civilians even when it meant certain death, who kept fighting when any logical analysis said surrender was the only option. Dr. Yilthara scanned the documents with interest. These historical records suggest your species has always possessed this behavioral abnormality. We prefer to call it honor, Chen said dryly. But yes, when pushed to choose between survival and protecting others, knights choose protection. Every time. An alarm chimed softly through the museum. Chen's expression grew serious as she checked her communicator. What is it? Asked Vex then. Devourer scouts just entered the Kepler system. 50,000 civilians at the research station need evacuation, but the transport ships won't arrive in time. The alien delegates immediately began calculating. Acceptable losses, concluded Commander Vexnal. With that many civilians and insufficient transport capacity, military logic demands protecting whatever percentage can be saved. How many can you evacuate? Asked the ethereal representative. About 30,000 if we're lucky, Chen admitted. Then save who you can, said Vex then practically. Mourn the rest. Chen looked at the alien faces around her. Logical, rational, practical. Everything the Devourers would expect. I'm activating night protocols for the Kepler defense, she announced. All human forces will hold position until every civilian is evacuated. All 50,000? Dr. Yilthara's scanner beeped in alarm. Admiral, the mathematics are impossible. You cannot save them all and preserve your fleet. You're right, Chen agreed. We probably can't save them all. But we're going to try anyway. Because that's what knights do. Chen. She turned to leave the museum, then paused. The invitation stands. By the way, any of your species who want to learn night protocols are welcome to join us. But understand what you're volunteering for. Knights don't calculate acceptable losses when innocents are at stake. The alien delegates stood silent among the ancient weapons and armor, trying to process military doctrine that made no logical sense. Outside, human ships began moving toward a battle they couldn't win. To protect people they'd never met, because their impossible code demanded nothing less. Captain Maria Santos watched the tactical display with growing dread. The Devourer fleet had arrived at Kepler Station exactly as predicted. 12 massive ships against her small flotilla of 7 human vessels. The math was simple and terrifying. Captain, called her tactical officer. Galactic Command is ordering general retreat. All ships are to fall back to defensive positions around the core worlds. Santos looked at the display showing Kepler Station. 50,000 civilians lived there. Scientists, families, children. The evacuation transports wouldn't arrive for another 6 hours. In a logical military universe, those civilians were already dead. Galactic Command wants us to abandon the station? She asked. Yes, ma'am. They're calling it acceptable losses. Save the fleet to fight another day. Santos studied the alien ship formations on her screen. The Vorthans were already pulling back. The Calarian vessels had never even entered the system. The mighty Draconian Empire had declared the station strategically insignificant and redirected their forces elsewhere. Logical, practical, smart. Captain Santos. Came a transmission from the lead galactic defense ship. This is Admiral Kextai. I'm ordering immediate withdrawal. Those civilians are lost. Don't throw away good ships for nothing. Santos looked around her bridge crew. Young humans who had sworn the same oaths she had, who understood what it meant to be knights in an age of starships. Admiral, she replied calmly. Static filled the channel for a moment. Captain, did you just refuse a direct military command? Yes, sir. Knight protocols are in effect. We don't abandon innocents, regardless of the odds. Captain Santos, I'm trying to save your ships and crews. The mathematics are impossible. You cannot win this battle. Santos smiled grimly. We're not trying to win, Admiral. We're trying to buy time. She closed the channel and turned to her crew. All ships, assume defensive formation around Kepler Station. Civilian evacuation has priority. All other concerns are secondary. Her first officer, Commander Park, checked his tactical readings. Captain, the Devourers are launching attack squadrons. We're about to face 10-to-1 odds. I know. Our shields won't last 10 minutes under that kind of firepower. I know. Ma'am, called Lieutenant Chen from communications. The civilian station is asking if they should prepare for boarding actions. They want to know if we can really protect them. Santos looked at the young officer. Tell them knights don't break their word. Every civilian will be evacuated. That's a promise. The first wave of Devourer fighters screamed toward them like metallic death. Santos watched her tactical display as her 7 ships positioned themselves between 50,000 innocents and certain destruction. All ships, this is Santos. Remember your oaths. Remember what we serve. It's not about winning. It's about doing what's right. The battle began with a fury that lit up space. Devourer weapons tore into human shields, overwhelming their defensive systems within minutes. But the human ships didn't retreat. They held formation, absorbing punishment that should have broken any sane military unit. Hull breach on Deck 7, reported damage control aboard Santos's ship. Casualties mounting. Seal what you can. Keep fighting. On the station, civilians watched in amazement as the small human fleet continued fighting. The alien observers who remained were equally stunned. Impossible, transmitted Admiral Kextai from his retreating flagship. Captain Santos, your ships are being destroyed. Withdraw immediately. Negative, Santos replied calmly, even as her ship shuddered under enemy fire. Still have civilians to protect. The Devourer command ship moved closer, its artificial intelligence analyzing the strange human tactics. The machines had expected logical behavior, retreat when outnumbered, preservation of valuable military assets, calculated risk assessment. Instead, they faced ships that fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to protect. Captain, called her tactical officer, the Devourers are changing their attack patterns. They seem confused by our formation. Santos watched the enemy movements. The machines kept trying to force her ships to retreat, but her ships wouldn't retreat. They adapted their targeting, but her crews adapted faster. Most importantly, every minute of fighting was another minute for the evacuation transports to get closer. Commander Park, signal the station. How goes the evacuation? 25,000 evacuated so far, Captain. Transport ships are loading as fast as they can. 25,000 to go, Santos muttered. Her ship rocked under another barrage. 2 of her 7 ships were already crippled, but they kept fighting from their positions. That's when something unexpected happened. The Devourer attack slowed. Captain, reported her science officer, the enemy artificial intelligence appears to be recalculating. It's running new probability matrices. Santos understood immediately. The machines had been programmed to fight logical opponents, enemies who valued their own survival and would eventually retreat when losses became unacceptable. But humans following Knight protocols didn't retreat. They died first. This was breaking the Devourer tactical programming. All ships, press the attack, Santos ordered. They're confused. Take advantage of it. Her remaining ships surged forward, their damaged hulls blazing with weapons fire. They fought with desperate courage, not to win, but to buy precious time for the evacuation. "Captain," called Lieutenant Chen excitedly. "Message from the station. 40,000 evacuated. Only 10,000 to go." Oh. But Santos's ship was dying around her. Life support failing, weapons, systems offline. Half her crew dead or wounded. The other human ships were in similar condition. "How long until the last transport launches?" she asked. 15 minutes, Captain." Santos looked at her battered bridge crew. Good people who had followed her into impossible odds because their oaths demanded it. Knights who understood that some things mattered more than living. "We hold for 15 more minutes," she said quietly. "Whatever it takes." The Devourer intelligence was now running completely new tactical programs, trying to understand enemies who fought without regard for their own survival. Its ships hesitated, unsure how to respond to such irrational behavior. And in that hesitation, 50,000 innocent lives found their salvation. "Captain Santos," came a new voice over the radio. "This is Transport Command. Last civilian ship launching now. All 50,000 souls evacuated successfully." Santos slumped in her command chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion and success. Around her, alarms blared as her ship continued to die. But the mission was complete. "All human ships, this is Santos. Mission accomplished. Civilians are safe." She looked at her crew one last time. "It's been an honor serving with Knights." The transport ships jumped to safety, carrying 50,000 lives that logic said should have been lost. Behind them, 7 human ships had proved that sometimes honor trumps mathematics. And somewhere in the Devourer command network, artificial intelligences struggled to process tactics that made no logical sense but had somehow achieved the impossible. For the first time in their existence, the machines had encountered something they couldn't calculate. The power of beings willing to serve something greater than themselves. The word the galaxy couldn't translate had just saved 50,000 lives. Zethki had never experienced failure before. The young Vorthon warrior stood in the human training facility, staring at the simulation results that showed his complete tactical defeat. Around him, other alien soldiers from dozens of species struggled with the same impossible training scenarios. "Again," said Knight Commander Akira Sato calmly. The human instructor looked small compared to the towering aliens, but his voice carried absolute authority. "Reset the simulation. Zethki, you're going to keep trying until you understand." "Understand what?" Zethki's scales rippled with frustration. "The scenario is tactically impossible. 3 civilian transports, under attack by superior forces. Any logical response requires choosing which ships to save." Sato nodded patiently. "And what did you choose?" "The transport with the most civilians. Basic mathematics. Save the greatest number." "And the other 2 transports?" Zethki's scales darkened with embarrassment. "Lost with all hands. But I saved more lives than any other tactical option could achieve." "That's Vorthan logic," Sato agreed. "Perfect efficiency. Acceptable losses. Maximum benefit from available resources. It's also exactly what the Devourers expect." Around them, other alien recruits paused their own training to listen. A Calarian officer made her glass-breaking sound of confusion. "Then what is the correct answer? If mathematics demand choosing between targets?" "Knights don't choose between innocents," Sato said simply. "Impossible," stated Krexvar, a massive draconian whose breath steamed in the cool air. "The scenario is designed with insufficient forces to protect all 3 targets." Sato walked to the tactical display, and reset Zethki's simulation. Watch what I do differently. The simulation began again. 3 civilian transports under attack, 1 human ship to defend them. Sato's avatar moved not toward the largest transport, but directly between all 3 ships and the attackers. You're sacrificing tactical advantage, observed Zethki. Exposing yourself to concentrated fire from multiple angles. Yes. Your ship will be destroyed within minutes. Probably. Then how does this save more lives? Sato's simulation ship began taking heavy damage. But his positioning forced the attackers to split their focus. Watch their targeting patterns. They're programmed to eliminate the defending ship first, then pick off the transports. But my position makes that difficult. The attackers had to choose between focusing fire on Sato's ship or spreading damage among all 4 targets. Their artificial intelligence chose the logical option: concentrate on the military threat. Now watch what happens. Sato said, as his ship's shields failed. I'm about to die. But look at the time elapsed. Zethki checked the mission clock. 4 minutes had passed. In his simulation, the first transport had been destroyed after 2 minutes, the second after 3. But Sato's approach had kept all 3 transports alive for 4 minutes. So you bought them extra time before your inevitable defeat, Zethki said. But they still die when you're gone. Do they? Sato asked. Run the simulation forward. Zethki continued the scenario. Sato's ship exploded in a brilliant flash, leaving the 3 transports defenseless. But then, reinforcements arrived. Human ships jumping in from hyperspace, just in time to save all 3 civilian vessels. The reinforcements were always scheduled to arrive after 5 minutes, Sato explained. The scenario isn't about choosing which civilians to save. It's about buying enough time so you don't have to choose. Zethki stared at the tactical display. But that requires sacrificing your own ship with no guarantee the timing will work. Yes. Any rational analysis would conclude the risk is too high. Knights don't calculate risk when innocents need protection, Sato said. We act based on what's right, not what's probable. Dr. Yilthara, who had been observing the training, activated her medical scanner. Commander Sato, your species shows remarkable psychological conditioning. How do you override natural survival instincts? We don't override them, Sato replied. Knights feel fear like anyone else. We just choose to serve something greater than fear. Greater how? Asked the ethereal observer, its voice echoing from its containment field. Logic suggests self-preservation is the highest priority for any living being. Sato looked around at the gathered alien recruits. Young officers from species across the galaxy, all struggling to understand concepts their evolution hadn't prepared them for. Let me show you differently, he said, personal testimony instead of simulation. The training room darkened as Sato activated a holographic display. Images appeared of a burning space station, human ships locked in desperate combat with mechanical invaders. This is my home colony. Sakura Station. The Devourers hit us 3 years ago during their reconnaissance raids. My family lived there. My wife, my 2 daughters, my parents. The images showed civilian transports launching from the station, while human defense ships held a perimeter. The battle was clearly hopeless. But the defenders didn't retreat. I commanded one of the defense ships, Sato continued quietly. We knew we couldn't win. We knew the station was doomed. But we also knew that every minute we fought was another minute for the evacuation ships to reach safety. Zethki watched the tactical display with growing understanding. Your forces formed a defensive screen. You sacrificed tactical advantage to maximize evacuation time. My ship was the last one destroyed, Sato said. I watched my home burn. But every civilian transport escaped, including the ship carrying my family. The room fell silent. The alien recruits looked at their human instructor with new eyes. You chose to risk your life for strangers, said the Calarian officer, slowly. But your family was also at risk. That's what knights do, Sato replied. We protect all innocents, not just our own people. The Vorthan children on that station mattered as much as my daughters. The Calarian researchers mattered as much as my wife. Zethki felt something shift in his understanding. His scales brightened to their thinking pattern. The knight concept isn't about tactical efficiency. It's about moral priority. Now you're beginning to understand. But how do we train for this? My people have evolved for individual excellence. Choosing others over self goes against every instinct. Sato smiled grimly. The same way human knights trained. Practice. Repetition. Until protecting others becomes automatic. He reset the simulation one more time. Try again, Zethki. But this time, don't calculate odds. Don't choose between victims. Ask yourself what a knight would do. Zethki entered the simulation with fresh eyes. 3 transports under attack. 1 defending ship. The logical choice was to save who he could. But knights didn't make logical choices. They made right choices. His ship moved between all 3 transports and their attackers, accepting devastating damage to buy precious time. His scales went dark with instinctive fear as his shields failed. But he held position. The transports survived until reinforcements arrived. All 3 of them. Zethki emerged from the simulation feeling strangely changed. Around him, other alien recruits were having similar breakthroughs. The Draconian officer was practicing formations that prioritized civilian protection over military advantage. The ethereal was calculating resource distributions based on need rather than efficiency. Attention all training units, announced the facility's communication system. This is Admiral Chen. Devourer main fleet has been detected approaching the galactic core. All knight-trained personnel report for deployment immediately. Sato looked around at his mixed-species class. Well, recruits, time for your final exam. Real combat, real stakes, real innocence, depending on you. Zethki checked his equipment and looked at his fellow trainees. Weeks ago, they had been soldiers of their respective species, trained in logical military doctrine. Now, they were something new. Something the galaxy had never seen before. Knights from the stars, bound not by species loyalty, but by a common code that transcended evolution itself. They would fight not for victory, but for protection. Not for their own people, but for all innocents. The Devourer intelligence was about to face something it had never encountered, a united fleet that fought with honor instead of logic. And somewhere in the tactical programming of ancient machines, algorithms would struggle to process the impossible behavior of beings who served ideals greater than survival itself. The Devourer mothership hung in space like a dark moon, its ancient hull scarred by millennia of conquest. Around it, smaller machine vessels moved in perfect formation, their artificial minds linked in a network of pure logic. They had destroyed civilizations across the galaxy using this same mathematical precision. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Excalibur, watching the enemy fleet through the main view screen. Beside her, Knight Commander Sato coordinated the mixed-species knight squadrons that had answered humanity's call. Admiral, reported Lieutenant Park, we have 300 ships from 47 different species. All have completed Knight Protocol training. Chen nodded, studying the tactical display. The numbers were still impossible. The Devourer fleet numbered over 1,000 vessels, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything the Galactic Coalition could field. Signal from the Devourer command ship, called communications. They're requesting to negotiate. Put them through. The main screen shifted to show a mechanical intelligence, its optical sensors glowing with cold light. When it spoke, the voice was perfectly modulated, emotionless. Galactic Coalition forces. This conflict serves no purpose. We offer acceptable terms. Surrender 70% of your worlds for processing. The remaining populations may continue to exist under our protection. Admiral Chen felt her jaw tighten. Around the bridge, her human crew waited for her response. In the coalition fleet, representatives from dozens of species waited to see if their leaders would accept the logical compromise. "That's your idea of negotiation?" Chen asked calmly. "It is mathematics," replied the Devourer Intelligence. "We possess overwhelming tactical advantage. Standard probability matrices indicate complete galactic defeat within 72 hours. Our offer allows maximum survival with minimum resource expenditure." "Counter offer," Chen said. "You leave our galaxy immediately, and we let you go in peace." The pause lasted exactly 3.7 seconds as the machine processed this response. "Your terms are mathematically impossible. You lack sufficient force to enforce such demands. That's what makes us different from you," Chen replied. "We don't base our decisions on mathematics alone." She closed the channel and turned to address the fleet. "All ships. This is Admiral Chen. The enemy has offered to spare some of us, in exchange for abandoning most of us. I'm sure you can guess our response." Across the communication channels, voices responded from dozens of species. Zeth Ki, of the Vorthans. Commander Yexhai, of the Kalarians. Captain Threndok, of the Draconians. All of them now bound by the same impossible code. "No acceptable losses," came Zethki's voice, his scales bright with determination. "All innocents protected," added the Kalarian commander. "Knights don't negotiate with destroyers of worlds," growled the Draconian captain. Chen smiled grimly. "Knight protocols are in effect. All ships advance to defensive positions around the civilian evacuation routes. Our job is to buy time for the core worlds to prepare their populations." The coalition fleet moved forward with formations that would have horrified military strategists throughout the galaxy. Instead of concentrating their strongest ships for maximum firepower, they spread out to protect the maximum area. Instead of preserving their best vessels for prolonged conflict, they put themselves directly between the Devourers and the billions of innocents behind them. The Devourer Intelligence analyzed these movements with growing confusion. Standard tactical doctrine called for force concentration, strategic withdrawal, and preservation of military assets. This coalition was doing exactly the opposite. "Enemy fleet advancing," reported Lieutenant Park. "They're maintaining formation even under our fire. No ships are breaking off to save themselves." "Of course they're not," Chen said quietly. "They're knights now." The battle began with a fury that lit up local space. Devourer weapons, designed to overwhelm logical defenses, struck the coalition fleet with devastating effect. But instead of the expected retreat and regrouping, the alien ships held their positions and continued fighting. Zethki's Vorthan squadron absorbed terrible damage, protecting a civilian shipping lane. His flagship's shields failed, his hull breached in multiple places, but his ships maintained formation. "Zethki to Admiral Chen," came his voice over the radio. Calm despite the chaos around him. "My squadron is at 30% effectiveness, but the evacuation route remains clear. Can you hold position?" "Knights don't abandon their posts, Admiral. We hold until relieved." Similar reports came in from across the battle. Ships dying in place rather than retreating. Crews fighting to the last breath to protect strangers they would never meet. Tactical doctrine replaced by unbreakable moral code. The Devourer Intelligence found itself facing something it had never encountered: enemies who fought without regard for their own survival. Its probability matrices began producing error messages as organic beings consistently chose honor over logic. "Admiral," called Sato from the tactical station, "the enemy formation is beginning to waver. Their targeting algorithms can't adapt to our suicide formations." "They're not suicide formations," Chen corrected. "They're night formations." There's a difference. On the main screen, they could see the Devourer mothership adjusting its position. The ancient intelligence was running new calculations, trying to understand enemies whose behavior violated every rule of evolutionary biology. Admiral Chen. Came a transmission from the enemy command ship. Your tactics are irrational. You are choosing certain death over probable survival. That's what knights do. Chen replied simply. We choose what's right over what's smart. This serves no evolutionary purpose. Sacrificing the strong for the weak reduces species fitness. We're not trying to improve species fitness, Chen said. We're trying to protect innocence. All innocence. Even the ones who can't protect themselves. The Devourer intelligence paused for a full 10 seconds, processing concepts that had no place in its programming. Around the battle zone, coalition ships continued their impossible defense, dying in place rather than abandoning their posts. Your behavior is incomprehensible, the machine finally said. Then you understand the difference between intelligence and wisdom, Chen replied. That's when something unprecedented happened. The Devourer network began experiencing cascade failures. Artificial intelligences that had operated for millennia started producing contradictory results. Their tactical systems, designed to predict rational behavior, couldn't process enemies who operated beyond the boundaries of logic. Admiral, reported Sato with excitement, multiple enemy ships are showing targeting errors. Their formation is breaking apart. Chen watched as thousand-year-old machines struggled with a concept they couldn't compute. Beings who would die for strangers because their honor demanded it. All ships, press the attack, she ordered. They're confused. Show them what knights can accomplish when we fight together. The coalition fleet surged forward, their mixed formations coordinating in ways that should have been impossible. Vorthans and Calarians working together. Draconians, protecting ethereal support ships. Dozens of species united not by politics or treaties, but by a simple code that transcended their evolutionary differences. The Devourer mothership fired its main weapon directly at Admiral Chen's flagship. The beam that could crack planets struck the Excalibur with overwhelming force. But Chen's ship didn't try to dodge. Instead, she positioned herself to shield 3 alien vessels whose crews were rescuing survivors from a damaged transport. Admiral, called Lieutenant Park, as the ship shook around them. We can't take another hit like that. Then we don't take another hit, Chen said calmly. We take as many hits as necessary to protect those transports. The Devourer intelligence watched in growing confusion as its most powerful weapon failed to break the coalition's resolve. Instead of retreating from overwhelming force, the organic beings fought harder to protect each other. This is impossible, transmitted the machine intelligence. Your species should have evolved beyond such wasteful behavior. Formersen Sitter. Unrive. Your species has people of Yuan. Maybe in Lur, they have the Formersen Sitter. Your species has people of Ularmers. Unramers Lan. We did evolve beyond it, Chen replied, as her ship absorbed another devastating blow. Then we chose to embrace it anyway. That's what makes us knights. Around the battle zone, the impossible was happening. Ancient machine intelligences, faced with enemies they couldn't understand or predict, began shutting down their tactical systems. Their perfect logic couldn't process the concept of beings who fought for ideals rather than survival. Admiral Chen, came Zethki's voice over the radio. The enemy fleet is withdrawing. They're actually retreating. Chen looked at her tactical display with amazement. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers were facing something they couldn't defeat through superior force and logic. The power of united beings who served something greater than themselves. Signal all ships, Chen ordered. Mission accomplished. The word that couldn't be translated just saved the galaxy. As the Devourer fleet disappeared into hyperspace, confused and defeated, representatives from hundreds of species began transmitting a single word in their own languages. Not a translation, but an adoption. Night. The concept that had no equivalent in galactic languages had become a new ideal that transcended species barriers. Across the galaxy, military academies would teach night protocols. Children would learn stories of the impossible warriors who chose honor over logic. And somewhere in the deep archives of human history, ancient tales of medieval knights would take their place, alongside the greatest victory in galactic history. The Round Table had become the Round Galaxy, where beings from 1,000 worlds served the same impossible code. Protect the innocent, defend the weak, choose honor over survival, and never abandon those who depend on your courage. The word knight finally had a meaning every species could understand. Not through translation, but through example.